Hello, my name is Nikita Grebnev, and this is the midterm review of Data Analytics Project Group 8. Even though it is a group project, I'm doing it alone due to a set of unfortunate circumstances that led to both of my teammates being removed from the course. For this project, I was assigned to internship at Dev Center House. DACH is a software development company working primarily with B2B clients, engaging with other enterprises and providing software engineering services in such spheres as CRM, client management, and project management. The current project they decided to involve me in is a prototype of their own UI web system, based primarily on Material UI and React.js. My responsibilities were to analyze the existing code of the project, plan for its restructurization into a library, design best practices involved in future development, and provide a set of tools that can be taken from the library and implemented in different various projects within the company. The project should have been my evaluation period, in which they plan to evaluate my skill set and work ethics before putting me on something more important than old UI code that they had on a back burner. This evaluation period should have been ended by week 5. However, it was prolonged due to unrelated events that I will discuss later in this report. After the discussion of ongoing affairs and the minor setback with Monica that happened on week 1 and the resolution of the misunderstandings that ensued, it was decided for me to complete the project on my own. Week 1 ended with me being presented with the task of reviewing the code of an existing project that started in February. The goal of this review was to see if and how the existing code can be reused into a library. I was excited to participate in creation of a new React library, and eager to study the work that was done before me. But soon I met a huge disappointment. The person working before me apparently was tasked with just creating a few demonstrational pages and did not bother creating any individual UI components. It dawned on me that I'm not only tasked with creating new components for React project, but basically I'm asked to rework everything that person have done, disassembling the spaghetti code within the project and then reassembling it into UI components, even before I could possibly start working on my own code. Here you can see the code that was existing in the project before I came to it. As you can see, this is just one of the forms. We have a validation inside of the component. We have the endpoint attachment inside of the component and the form workings inside of the component, so all the event handling goes inside of it. And this was the same with basically all the other components. If you take a look at any other form, validation, here's the endpoint, everything goes just... There was no system that would be spanned across all the library and could be reused or could be built upon. And basically I had to do it on my own. Week 2 was spent cleaning up the existing code. First I needed to figure out why the project I was given refused to launch. And then figure out why when it launched it did not look like it's supposed to. It turned out that the person working on this project prior to me was unaware of existence of separate stylization in React. This, of course, is the process of putting all the visual styling code into separate files or even modules and managing them through the build script, so that no one class can be accidentally repeated and no one component could accidentally be influenced by two separate sets of styles. Because of that, they had put all the styles into a single file, right here. Here you have it, single file for all the components. And then they tried to override them from within the component. which is nothing but backward thinking. Pulling out the string of styles and disassembling the singular project style sheet, I then implemented SAS, a stylizing system that implements exactly what I described above. And it makes it easier for developers to dynamically change the styles. I then reported my findings and decisions to software developer lead Agam Mishra, and was given a green light to do whatever I wanted to the project, which was great because I wanted to do a lot. At the beginning of week 3, I had parts of the project restructured and others planned for future restructuration, and finally came to a point when the project could be tied to the endpoints of the API. This is where I found out how the endpoints and event handling in general was implemented before what I just discussed. To my horrifying realization, each page had a separate event handling, incompatible with the rest of the project. This was not just wrong, it meant that none of them can be used as a base chain of forms typical for React, and all of them had to be redesigned. And this is how I spent most of the week 3, recreating event handling for forms and making sure that components can be automated with this system, simplifying immeasurably the process of creating new forms and pages. I also continued cleaning up the loose code in the project and finally started creating separate files and folders for each reusable component. I informed both Agam Mishra and the productivity manager Anthony McCann of my findings and decisions. They also agreed to it and they told me to proceed with them. And so I did. This is what the project looks now. So this is the same login form from before. As you can see, we have a handling right here, and this handling goes not from just the event handling within the component, but from event handling within the form itself. The form became its own individual component, and inside of it can be nested form fields with inputs, selects, links, anything you want, checkboxes, buttons, radio buttons, selects with multiple options, everything. And that was I was been working for, to basically create a system where a new form could be built, nested like a nesting doll, with components within components within components, and all of that would be hierarchical, and all of that will be inherited from the single component that could be traced all the way back. So the event handling would be automated because all of the event handling would be inherited as well as the validation and everything. So this approach is much better because now any form that I can open, any form that I open, like this register form right here, it's exactly the same. And every form that I will build next will be exactly the same and will be understandable from a glance. Over week 4, I added more and more UI components and tested them for reliability and compatibility with the rest of the project. But at this point, the library mostly consisted of my own code, so compatibility was not a big issue. All the new components were designed with a single event handling system in mind that I just described, and now they could be built on top of each other, having the same inherited functions and parameters, and responding adequately to the typical usage. By the end of that week, I had a working prototype of the library with a scope, event handling, and input components that could be reused in any typical project. Your regular array of text boxes, selects, radio buttons, checkboxes, and etc. Now I could finally return to the initial idea. Compile a demonstration page that the previous person working on the project built out of the initial spaghetti code. This was done quickly. I just showed you the login form and the registration form. And the resulting page lacked the problems the previous one had, like there were stuttering animations, conflicting styles, and long loading times. However, now all of it was gone because the deep-rooted problems of handling within component and tying to endpoints within component were solved by, well, changing a single component into multiple ones nested into each other, which is how you do in React. That's just how you do it. So basically right now there is a UI folder with all the components inside of it. If you click on like button component, all the handling is inside of the component. If you click checkbox, all the handling of checkbox is here. And the component that handles all the handling within the other components. Yes, I have a component that handles the handling within the other components. That's how you do it. It's called Superform. And basically it nests inside of it all the components and it passes them the functions that they should follow. This is much better. And my higher-ups agreed that this is much better. But reporting to DCH on week 5, when I informed Agam and Anthony that the project is basically done and all that's left is documentation, they told me to proceed with documentation and to wait for further instructions. They agreed on the importance of documentation and proposed that I create a wiki on the company GitHub page with extensive description of all my work, which I did the same week. First, I created documentation within the project itself. I went over each component and added a README file inside of their folders right next to the code. For example, I showed you the code for the button and all the handling. And next to it is a README file with all the parameters. I listed the inner and outer parameters of the component with a short description of what each parameter does. Like, for example, href parameter is a string, it's a link to the some internet page. Caption parameter is also a string, but it's a title of the button. Key parameter is the default React prop for tabulation that can be passed to it. Classes is a string, but few separate CSS classes can be passed to it and they will be combined in a meaningful way so that they don't override each other, etc, etc, etc. I also added the functions, which this object in particular lacks, but for example, if you go to Superform, Superform has in parameters descriptions of the functions that passes to the inside of the component and that can be accessed from the outside of the component. It also has a use case, usage example, which basically shows how the component is supposed to be used. When this all was done, I transported those explanations to the company wiki page. If we open the company GitHub and we go to the base React, doesn't show because I'm not signed in. Much better. So if we go to the company GitHub page, we can see the project and there's a wiki tab. And in this wiki, this is also all done by me. The description of the projects, the scripts that can be used, and the UI components. Here's a list of them. Here's a template to create new UI components so that it can be made easier for the future developers. And let's show some component that I didn't show before, like something simple like group block. So this is just a UI component. It has 3 parameters, whether it can grow, so basically whether it's flexible or not. Does it have any borders? And you can use it just as a div, but if you pass those parameters, it will also implement some CSS classes. And for a component like loading, for example, it also has a bunch of parameters, and basically it's a flexible loading component that shows a GIF animation of a loading screen before the endpoint returns the results. What also I can show, for example, radio buttons. Here you can see this is an input component and it has 2 use cases. It can be used on its own with handling outside of the component. and it can be used within a superform component with handling all packed inside of the superform component. Unfortunately, this is where things started to slow down. It turned out that I was misinformed about my evaluation period, that it should have been ending on week 5. And as I mentioned before in the beginning of this project, that it should have been ended on week 5, but it didn't. Due to both Agam and Anthony being occupied with other projects, neither of them could currently evaluate my work and decide on where to put my efforts next. So I spent the 3 remaining weeks testing and styling the UI elements that I created before. Weeks 4 and 5 before that were spent in a rush, trying to meet the opposite deadline because I was informed that I should be ready by week 5. But then week 5 ended and it turned out there was no deadline at all, and I could chill out and work at a leisurely pace. And that is what I did weeks 6 through 8, slowly checking my own work, periodically asking if either of my higher-ups are ready to move forward, and filling out the wiki when I found something incomplete or maybe unclear. Even though my planning wasn't anywhere near perfect, I managed the deadlines I had and just had to wait for my higher-ups to become available. Only today, July 6th, was a promise that this week I will have a definite answer after I pestered Anthony enough and asked what is going on and whether they even want to keep me or not. He answered that they do want to keep me, in fact, and he's sorry for the time I had to wait. And tomorrow I will be meeting Daniel. He's a senior software developer. And with him, Anthony will inform me about my next project. On this page here, you can see how I run tasks in parallel to achieve higher efficiency, spend less time, and meet my deadline. And how in the end, right after June 14th, my efficiency went to waste because I had nothing to do and all I had to do was styling and testing. Styling, testing, and demonstration, as you can see here. Both the rush on the project to meet the deadline and slow waiting time afterwards could be also seen on the projected resources chart right here. During weeks 4 and 5, I had to increase the time spent on the project, while week 6 and later were uneventful. Current fictional projection of the costs consists only of my own time and the arbitrary $12,000 the company might have spent on a software developer. Additional 16 hours were spent on week 4 and week 5, but then less hours working were spent on week 6 and week 7. Compensated for that. Week 8 resulted in very little work spent on the project due to lack of tasks. Lesser workload saved 16 hours of time, resulting in $800 reduction to the overall cost. Finally, let's talk about the events ahead of me. I have already caught glimpses of what this project might be from what Agam and Anthony told me. It seems that it is an older project. It's about 8 years in development, and it is already developed, deployed, and supported for a large amount of time. However, they want to modify it and to create new features for it. The internal name of the project is Kurd Shopping, and it's a buying and selling platform for used cards in Kurdistan. Apart from Googling the location of Kurdistan, I will be adding new UI features and implementing all the design practices I created during my long evaluation period. Tomorrow, July 7th, I will find out more about this project. And even if it is the one they have been talking about, or maybe there will be something else that they want to occupy me with. Information about the project and whatever more I gather this week, I will report next Tuesday, July 13th. Hopefully, by then I will be able to also go over exactly what this project is supposed to be and what features they need me to design. Also, I made a mental note to be more assertive during my discussions with Agam and Anthony, since they're so easy to dismiss me. Anyways, that was Nikita Grebnev signing out. Thank you. Take care.